Hello, I am Camila González and I'm going to do the final exam of Estudios Interculturales de la Lengua Inglesa. I would like to talk about how it's going to be the structure of my presentation. First of all, I'm going to talk about what is culture based on the article language and culture. Then I'm going to talk about how culture is reflected on three stories I have chosen of Mice and Men, Evelyn, and Snow, Glass, and Apples. In conclusion, I'm going to talk about how a specific culture is reflected in these three stories. People live in society because human is a social being. To live surrounded by people make us develop some attitudes. Culture is to share these attitudes or values or beliefs in a determinate social group. Social groups can occur in family, in the neighborhood, in the school, or we can talk about, for example, the culture of a specific country. The ability of communication, it was make us discover what things, what attitudes we have in common in a specific, in a determinate social group. Based on the article Language and Culture, we can affirm that we are surrounded by culture since we born. We watch and repeat what other generations said that it was correct, that it was acceptable, and it's because of this that culture is internalized. We usually do not discuss it, for us it's just natural. First of all, I would like to talk about the story of Mice and Men and how the culture of taboo and of patriarchy is reflected in this story. Lenny was a man who had a mental illness. He was sick, and probably in his family it wasn't normal to talk about mental problems. It was a kind of taboo. This kind of taboo are very dangerous because it not only affects the person who is suffering it, it also affects people who is around him. Because in a determinate moment, he, for example, end up killing a woman. Also, when Lenny and George start to work in a farm, they know they meet the owner of a farm who was very violent with male chauvinist behaviors. This man probably was raised in a culture of patriarchy because he thought that have all the power about his wife. He want to have the control about the whereabouts of his wife, and in those times it was really normal, this kind of conduct, this kind of behaviors. So the behaviors of the taboo about the mental illness and the behaviors about to be violent to a woman. Secondly, I would like to talk about the story Evelyn and how the culture of values and also the culture of patriarchy is reflected here. We can see the culture of values reflected on the love for the country. They thought that whoever who decide to abandon the country, his family, their family, their friends, was seen as an act of cowardice. Even if in that time the country was passing through a big paralysis, these kind of values were still important. Also, we have that Evelyn's father was very violent with his wife and with his daughter. He hit his wife So we can see how he was raised in a very patriarchal culture where the man have all the power about women. Finally, I would like to talk about snow-glass Naples and the culture of surviving and the culture also of patriarchy. The culture of survive is based on they collected food. They collected apples during autumn to sell them and to eat them in winter. This is a culture of survive because they created fairs where people sell this food, and they were talking, and this was a kind of tradition. This happened year by year. And we have the culture of patriarchy because in a determinate moment the queen was raped by a prince. Even if this is a fantastic story, it was really common even in stories of fantasy to talk about patriarchy culture. It is so internalized in the society that we can see it even in fantastic stories. It's because of that in conclusion we can talk about how the culture of patriarchy is reflected in these three stories. It is so internalized in our culture, in all the world, that we can find it in every story that we read. The culture of patriarchy has been with us for so many centuries. We create the culture of patriarchy, the society created, and as it was created, it was constructed, we can deconstruct it. Why we can deconstruct it? Because the human being is a social being that it is constantly evolving, and because of that, with the pass of the years, we can end up erasing this kind of culture. The culture, this kind of dangerous cultures, as it was the taboo of mental illness, must be erased, and it is our job to see what is happening, to realize that is a problem, that the culture of patriarchy really exists, and that just changing some conducts, just some behaviors, just teaching this to the children since they are little kids, we can change this culture of patriarchy.